So where did your real exploration for excellencism begin?
Well, I've been doing research on perfectionism for, I would say, the last 15, 20 years. And as you know, the findings are a little bit all over the place when it comes to a construct that we call perfectionistic standards. So the type of goals and pursuit that perfectionistic people are aiming at seems sometimes to be relating to good outcomes, such as better performance, more well-being, more life satisfaction. But then when you talk to people, even the same participants who respond to our questionnaire, a lot of them seems to be unhappy about their perfectionism. And it seems to be triggering worries, doubt, concerns, even suicidal ideation sometimes that doesn't seem to match the pattern of empirical findings that we are getting from questionnaires. And looking more closely into the question we're asking in these questionnaires, we came to realize that some of these items are not measuring perfectionism. They're just measuring the pursuit of high standards, challenging goals, difficult objectives that people set for themselves, but not necessarily perfectionistic goals. So came the decision to try to create a new framework that would create a division between the pursuit of high, challenging, difficult goals and the pursuit of unrealistic, unattainable goals that are associated with the pursuit of perfection.
We had Gordon Flett on the podcast before, as I mentioned to you just before we started recording, and he said this quote in the podcast where he said, you only have to count the amount of perfectionists in the graveyard, which was his way of talking around the suicidal ideation side of perfectionism. But it's so strange because my life at the moment is talking a lot about perfectionism, and I see a lot of it in athletes, just everyday people. But if I talk to someone about my research, my studies on it, my interest in it, someone will just go, oh yeah, I'm a perfectionist. And it's always given that negative connotation. They always look at you in this, I'm ashamed of myself of being a perfectionist. And I always have to remind them, like, no, there is really good things about being a perfectionist. There are some really great things. Like, you do want perfectionists around. They've got high standards, they strive for goals, they're motivated. That we just completely discount that because we spend so much time talking about these negative connotations.
Yeah, and one thing that I came to realize also in both my coaching and looking at the literatures and some of the novel studies that we're doing now, when everything is okay in your life, when you're sailing on a smooth sea, it seems that perfectionistic people are doing just as fine as excellence strivers. There's no, there's no storm, there's no wind, there's no challenges. But then when the wind picks up and when the pressure adds up and when you start making mistakes in a game and when other people around you, your coach, society, your parents, starts putting pressure on you, it's where perfectionism tends to become a risk factor for all kinds of negative things. So perfectionists, they have a tendency to define themselves based on success. So when they don't succeed to the level of their expectation, and their expectations are very high, this is where they tend to beat themselves up and be extremely self-critical. And they are not able to savor the little battles and the little success that are going to be happening in a golf game or in a sport events. They're aiming for the sky all the time, but unfortunately, perfectionism or perfection cannot be attained. Even in my in my undergraduate motivation course, I showed the footage of Nadia Comaneci perfect performance at the Montreal Olympic Games. So you have the qualification round and you have the finals, and she got a 10 on both. But you look at slow motion and the two performances are not exactly the same. You can spot little mistakes in both. So she was able to adapt, she was able to recover, and it doesn't show, even the judges cannot see that on full speed. But when you slow down the performance, you're still able to find mistakes. So even in a perfect game or a perfect performance, perfection is never really attained. So perfectionists are going to tend to focus on these little details and these little mistakes, and they will tend to lose sight of the bigger picture of the outstanding performance that they just delivered in a competition.
So where do you think this desire for us to be perfect comes from? What purpose does it serve us, whether it's from a human evolution perspective? Where do you think it stems from?
That's an excellent question. A lot of people think that it comes from society, parenting, and a bit of it comes from genetic transmission. So there seems to be a 40 to 45% of the variance that is explainable by the genetic component. But a lot of it comes from being surrounded by parents, professors, schools, sporting environments that inadvertently transmit the message that good is never good enough. And nowadays, when you browse and when you spend time on Instagram, there seems to be the development of an hustle culture where you need to be striving all the time, regardless of what you're doing. You need to be greedy all the time in school, in sport, in your relationship. And all of these things are unsustainable. And they come at the price of never being able to really disconnect, never really being able to just recover, and just accepting that you cannot go 100% on every single try you're taking in a practice. It's virtually impossible. So this desire of perfection comes from the fear of never being good enough. It also comes from a desire to be loved by other people around us. And when people around us give us the impression that they only love us when we are performing, then that becomes dangerous because yourself become attached to performance. And whenever you make a mistake, you feel that you are about to lose the love, the respect, and the regards from other people around you. And it can be quite subtle. I'm quite sure that most parents and most coaches and most teachers are not even aware of some of the messages they are sending to young people and the danger it can have on the development of their perfectionism.
Do you think it came from a sort of class and status point of view, that if you weren't seen as perfect or even striving for that, then you weren't really accepted as a higher class of human being? And that's why I kind of think about whether it's even mating culture, whatever it might be in our human biology, that we are sort of built towards the stronger, better groomed type human. And that's the thinking even from a caveman perspective, right? You think like the real alpha is that's the goal. And I wonder if that then just started to really stem into when society became more modernized and classes created, and this idea of being perfect then started to stem into society. And then I think where we're at now is where we've supercharged it with the attainability of everyone. Like everyone's at our fingertips. So I can see this guy with chiseled abs, great pecs and great body looks like, but then there'll be someone down the road that's bigger, better, right? And it's never ending because we've got so much access to so many human beings now.
I think there has always been, even before social media, I think perfectionism was there. It may not have been as prevalent. And regarding social class, Andrew Elliott from the University of Rochester does very interesting research looking at how how social inequalities create competitive pressure. And what's interesting about it is that both kids from affluent schools and neighborhood and kids from underprivileged groups experience the same type of pressure. In one case, it's a pressure about maintaining your status. So parents fearing that their kids are going to live a life that is not as good as their own life. So there's this pressure from parents to make sure that their kids are doing good in everything, just to make sure that they can maintain their way of living. And there's also pressure for kids in underprivileged condition to try to access to the medium class, where it's becoming less and less accessible because the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And there's I don't know if you know the rap song from Eminem, "You Only Got One Shot." So a lot of people who comes from tougher neighborhoods feel that they will only have one opportunity. And if they miss it, the opportunity will never come back again. So that brings added pressure to perform, added pressure to succeed, because it might be your only way out and your only way to move up the ladder of social classes. So I think that there is this component that as social psychologists I'm aware of, and I think it's very important to consider. And there's also social media, as you noted, where it seems like the opportunity to compare yourself to others is more prevalent than ever, and you can compare yourself on all kinds of criteria. You know, you can, if you're a cook, you're going to find the greatest recipe online. If you're someone into musculation, you're going to find people who are more fit than you. If you're a golfer, you're going to always look for the new drills, the new app, the new ways of becoming better at your sports. And it's very easy to get lost, even as an adult. So I can only imagine the pressure and the struggles of teenagers who are trying to develop their identity in a world where competition and comparison to others seems to be more prevalent than ever.
And then I feel like we've inextricably linked perfectionism into our sports as we've created them. You just, through the nature of striving and wanting to be better and the quite simplistic format of trying to win, say, a 100-meter race, we have, from day one, inextricably linked ourselves into the strive for better. Just better. Let's start there. And I think we can't run away from it. So it's now the different forms of the perfectionism that we see. So it's no longer just, do I need to win the race? I need to maybe do it looking a certain way. I need to do it with the right shoes. I need to do it with a good personality, be great on camera. There's all these other elements that have come into it that no longer does it just require you to go from A to B faster and be really good at that. There's so much more added in.
And that brings the element also of, for a perfectionist, sometimes winning is not enough. They need to outperform others. They need to clearly dominate their opponent. And they need to do that by looking effortless, as if it was a breeze. And most of the time, they will conceal the real amount of effort that they really put into their preparation, just to make sure to be perceived as effortless performance, which in most of the case, we all know that in sport, talent is not enough. So if you don't make efforts, success will not happen. But a lot of people, and effort is kind of a paradoxical thing where no one really likes to make effort. And one of the reasons for it is that if we succeed after making effort, we cannot attribute our success to our talent. So we need to say to ourselves, if next time I'm not able to put the same amount of effort, Or if next time I come across someone who is really better than me, maybe I will not be able to maintain this performance. So there's this preference of attributing our success to talent. And there's this ambiguity about effort, where effort is needed, but it seems like everyone would like to be able to perform without it. And that's something that, if we go back to all the attribution theories, has always been a paradox in psychology. And we have mindsets now that try to promote efforts and strategies, but the catch-22 of this is that a lot of people would prefer believing or attributing their success to just their talent than their effort.
I would have loved to have heard Nadia Comaneci's opinion of her perfect tens. I wonder what they would have been. What do you think they would have been?
I saw her in a few. She gives conference sometimes in Canada, and I've heard her once, and she's not satisfied about her performance. She's never been satisfied about her performance. Of course, she won the gold, so yes, she's satisfied of this, but she felt like an imposter. She always was worried that people would discover that she was not as good as what they initially thought. So that's another common theme in perfectionists, is that even when they are performing very well, they still feel like imposter. They still feel like they don't belong. And part of it is kind of an overselling issue. When you're striving for things that are not attainable, you're going to be even less satisfied when you came close to these attainments. And there's this tendency of doing what I like to call the inverted limbo, where the limbo dance, where you want to be going down. What the perfectionists do is that they keep raising the bar higher and higher and higher and higher, up to a point where no human beings would be able to attain the type of goals and expectations that perfectionist people have for themselves.
That's so interesting. Yeah. You go the other way, a limbo ends at the floor. Yeah. Physically could not get a human body under it, but that will never end, going the other way. It'll never end. And and I think that's where this interesting part of perfectionism lies for me, because it's so inextricably linked with your self-worth, that you will just never be enough if you don't achieve this expectation that you've set for yourself. So people listening, and maybe for yourself, my sport, cricket, it's an incredibly interesting sport in this sense. And I think this is why I don't think it's a coincidence I've come down this road since my studies. And it's because it is a sport that is built on perfectionism. It attains you to find like the perfect technique. It asks you, literally in the handbooks, like certain techniques to get in order to find success. But then the other thing from it is, you could get two people who score an equal set amount of runs, one guy getting 100 and another guy getting another 100, right? Or another girl getting 100, another girl getting 100. But you could quite simply say one is better than the other. Statistically, exactly the same. But someone will say that was a better 100 because it looked a certain way. It had something else to it. It had this way it was done, and it could have been the technique of the shots. One could have been totally scrappy, could have been really needed from the situation, and then the other was just this effortless, like pure talent. And there's some players in history that people have said like it was a joy to watch them play. And you're talking kind of a difference between, I don't know, watching a Federer and maybe a Nadal. Two guys who could have equal statistics, but you would maybe argue some people would look at Federer and go, oh, it's just perfection because of the way it looked. But actually, statistically, it's no different. Both guys get the job done. They win. They're successful. But it's this perfectionistic standard that people are either placing from themselves onto other people, or the athlete doing it themselves. I've got a young lad who had an amazing performance, And the information that I was getting from him and his mother was he didn't think it was enough. He just did not think it was enough. And it's like, this will never end. We will never find an end to this.
I think you're right that in a lot of sports, the criteria that we use to define success are based on something that is very close to perfection. And our role as coach is to try to reframe some of these standards. To give you an example, crickets and baseball are a bit similar, where in baseball you can have a strikeout. So when the batter gets 3 strikes, not able to put the ball in play, he's out and he goes back to the bench. But 2 strikeouts, same outcome, can be extremely different. And some can be productive for the team and some can be less productive for the team. So for example, if you do 3 balls in a row and you swing and miss, after only 3 pitches, you're back to the bench. So you did not really fatigue the pitcher that you're facing. In contrast, if you stay there for 15 pitches, where you put the ball on the foul line 12 times, the pitcher is going to get tired and then the next batter is going to come at an advantage. And eventually the starting pitcher, which is usually the best one on their team, is going to be replaced by a second pitcher that comes from the bullpen. So there is value to failure, and not all failures are the same quality. So a lot of the coaching, I think, needs to reframe success and help the athletes to find success even when they're failing. It could be based on improvement. It could be based on, just like I described, a good at-bat in baseball. Or it could be in other sports and golf. For example, you played horrible, but you shoot 72. And some other days you played great, but you're not able to hold a putt and you end up shooting 72. So it's the same number, but the quality of the performance was not the same. So instead of just focusing on results, outcomes, and raw metrics, I think that we need to reconsider the process and look at more key performance indicators that gives an indication of whether people are improving and whether people are performing to the best of their potential, instead of just looking at winning, losing, and the score that people put on their score sheet at the end of the day. So there is a job of the coaching staff to try to reformulate and create other standards that athletes can evaluate themselves on.
I had Richard Cheetham on recently, who's a quite well-known coach educator here in the UK. Done a lot of work in various different institutions at very high levels. And I didn't pose him this question because I probably wasn't thinking about it at the time, but considering where we are moving as a society, as human beings, and just general progression in both all domains, but sport in particular, we still use old coaching techniques and methods in a very fast-moving world. And it's not like our biology, where our biology will move at a slower rate to what society is moving. So the effects that we're having from social media, dopamine activation, things like that. Coaching we made it. It's man-made. Like, we can rip that rule book up as quickly as we made it. And I wonder if that's a consideration that we need to have, is to really look at what we believe are key coaching concepts and what we now in this 21st century believe is going to move us forward in these domains for, I think even just not at the performance element of sport, but I'm talking grassroots, school education, and how we view that, because that's what sport should be about. It should be about inspiring people to want to stay in it, not to have to need to strive for perfection or strive for some form of high performance outcome that might be placed onto them through what the old rule books are saying. I don't know. It's just, I see that as something very, very simple and tangible to change if we kind of all come to an agreement.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that as well, because I'm coaching baseball at the U15 level, which my team is the highest level that kids can play at this age group. And it's so easy just to come back into our habitual way of coaching. Even if we have the knowledge, even if I read and I do studies on motor learning and learning in academia and learning for school, it's just so easy when you're preparing your practice plan to go back to the habitual way of coaching. Just, piling up reps, thinking that reps is good enough. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that most of us who coach are perfectionists. So sometimes we would rather hit 10 ground ball at the same speed with the same amount of bounce to make sure that our players are looking good in practice. That's reassuring for the coach, because it tells you that they're good, they're ready for the game, and I'm doing a good job because I taught them to do it properly. But then we all know what happens when game day arrives and they've practiced in a context that is not representative of game situations. Then they're gonna start struggling. They won't be able to adjust to game speed, to adjust to different type of bounce, to different type of situation. And disconnecting the decision making from the motor action is often what we do in practice. We just create situation where kids don't have to make any decision. So that's easy to control your movement when all you have to do is focus on patterning. But then when runners are on the base, and when there's noise around, distractions, multiple situations that you can decide to go left, right, this is where kids are not always prepared, because most of the time it's our fault as coach, because we did not create the learning environment that prepared them for these decision making they have to do in games. So I think that we haven't paid enough attention to perfectionism of coaches and perfectionism of teachers, because it has an influence on how the kids are going to be prepared for the game, and also how they are going to be internalizing messages about performance and success and develop their identity based on it.
I'd probably add leaders into that,
Yes.
Especially in the corporate world. I was recently doing a leadership conference and running that for a couple of days, and you very quickly realize that people just from any walk of life are placed into high-performing environments, asked to lead, but there's nothing really saying that they aren't perfectionists themselves. And then without any understanding of it, they are then straight away placing that other-orientated perfectionism onto other people, and they're placing their standards onto other people. So yeah, I would probably add in the corporate leadership environment as well, which is even more sort of unsanctioned in some form. It's because it's not really studied, it's not really written about. It's just kind of, you hear, well, we got my boss just wants me to be perfect all the time and like won't set such high standards, but it's kind of swept away, and we focus on sport and the performance domains like that.
And when we compare excellence strivers to perfection strivers, what we find is that the perfection strivers have more of a bottom line mentality. So in other words, all they care about is success, even if it comes at the expense of the well-being of their athletes or the well-being of their followers. So prioritizing performance and not caring enough about the well-being and just the sustainability of your operation seems to be the hallmark of perfection strivers. So getting at short-term outcomes without necessarily considering the long-term cost of your operation seems to be one modus operandi of perfection strivers. And there's also this tendency, because of the bottom line mentality, to morally disengage themselves from their activity. So in sport, for example, yelling at umpires, perceiving your opponent as non-humans just to justify your wrongdoing and your tempting of hurting them, are the types of cognitive stratagems that perfectionism are putting in place to justify their desire to outperform others at any given cost. So such winning at all cost mentality, of course, can have trickle-down effect on the athletes themselves and the followers themselves. And eventually for an organization, there's going to be a cost associated with that. So in the short term, it can be profitable, but in the long term, it will eventually cost something to the organization. It could be a burnout for the employees. It could be lower retention rate of the employees, so higher turnaround rates, and just incivility, where people are going to start competing against each other instead of working cooperatively to try to attain a common good or a common goal within the organization. So there's this danger of creating inadvertently a perfectionistic culture in organization that sometimes and oftentimes starts by the leaderships, who unfortunately will have trickle-down effect on everyone.
I can't remember if it was one of your papers or maybe one cited in your, but something about sports cheats or perfectionists being more willing to cheat.
Yeah, we did
and being open to that.
We did a very, I'm a baseball coach, so I try to find opportunities to do study in baseball just out of passion for the sports. And a few years ago, one of the team, the Houston Astros, got caught in a cheating incident where they've put camera in their stadium to try to steal the sign that the catcher is relaying to the pitcher. So that way, real time, the batters in the box were informed of which pitch was coming to them. So facing a 95 mile per hour fastball is not that difficult when you know it's coming. It becomes difficult when pitchers are able to mix that with a curveball, with a slider, with a changeup. But these guys, when they know that the fastball is coming, they're going to be able to make damage. So they knew that fastball were coming because they were informed through communication device. So their teammates were banging on a trash can just to inform them of the type of pitch that was coming. So what we did is we surveyed sport fans to know about their opinion about the sign stealing incident. And what we discovered was that perfection strivers were more tolerant about the sign stealing incident compared to the excellence strivers, which is fascinating because, sports fans are just watching the game. They don't get any real life benefit out of their team cheating except the bragging right of telling their friends that their team won. But still, perfection strivers had a different viewpoint about the meaning and the incidence of the sign stealing incident in professional baseball. So we did that study with Ben Schellenberg from the University of Manitoba, and we replicated it 2 years after, because that team, the cheaters, ended up being able to qualify themselves again for the World Series of Baseball. So we were able to do a second study during the World Series of Baseball, and we found 2 years after the exact same results. So perfection strivers were still more tolerant and accepting of the bad behaviors of professional athletes.
And you did get that second study again on the fans?
Again on the fans, and this time we recruited fans of both the Houston Astros and the teams that they were facing in the final of the 2021 or 2022 season. I don't recall exactly the year. And we also took the opportunity to ask them, because there's a lot of usage of performance enhancement drug in baseball. So at least 2 or 3 times a year, you get a star being suspended for 30 games because of usage of it. So we also asked the fans to provide us their opinion about performance enhancement drug. And there again, perfection strivers were more tolerant of professional athletes using substances to improve their performance compared to the excellence strivers.
I mean, you're probably not going to get the results from an athlete, because that would mean they would be having to admit to doing something, and I think that would be where it would be quite interesting on the results, because you're having to then weigh up the consequences. A fan doesn't have the consequences on their shoulders. They can just say, oh, whatever happens, happens. It doesn't affect me. Like, I'm going to go home tonight. But if you were to do it to an athlete, they're very conscious that they are breaking the rules. They're manipulating. It would maybe be an interesting sort of thought experiment to throw them the idea that they wouldn't get caught, right? Would you do it if you couldn't get caught? And yeah, then you're probably starting to go into a bit of a moral landscape.
Yeah. We did a study last summer when ChatGPT came along in the academia landscape, where it's very difficult nowadays to do any written assignments because we all feel that students are going to use ChatGPT, copy and paste their texts, and provide that as an answer to the written assignments. So we did a study about the viewpoints, the opinions, the attitude of students regarding illegal usage of ChatGPT. And there again, what we found is that the perfection strivers, and even if they knew it was illegal and they were not allowed to use it for their school assignments, they were still more willing to use it, and they had more positive attitudes. And the type of cognitive stratagem was like, everyone's using it anyway, so it doesn't matter, it doesn't care, and we shouldn't be penalized. The only thing that really matters after all is the quality of the paper that you're ending in. So if it's written by you, fine. If it's not written by you, no problem. It's still your name on the paper. So there is again this idea of moral disengagement. And I like to say, I'm not blaming the perfectionist. I'm blaming the context that puts more than ever pressure on students to compete, to have access to more than ever limited resources. So that context creates the perfect ethos for these types of behaviors to happen and to become more and more prevalent.
That's fascinating, considering people are very willing to forego their moral boundaries in striving for that perfectionism and that's high standard that they're going after. It's incredible. So what is excellencism?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Excellenceism can be seen as a counterpoint to perfectionism. So one way of looking at it, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to look at to give you some words associated with it. So one of the first things we did is we jumped into dictionaries and look at the synonym and all of the wordings that can be used to define excellence versus perfection. And that gave us kind of a lexical analysis to be able to create indicators to separate the two. So excellence, basically, you're going to find words such as very good, competent, accomplished, very productive, skillful, high quality, successful, great, capable. So people who strive and aim toward these types of endpoints where the goals and the standards are high, they're demanding, but they're attainable and they're realistic, and people know when to stop. So they're not going to be pursuing that in a relentless manner. When it's good enough, it's good enough. So that would be kind of the analogy of an excellence strivers. They know when to stop because when it's good enough, it's good enough. The counterpoint to that is the typical perfectionism, where you're going to have words such as excessive, exaggerated, extreme, needless, strict, overdone, overmuch, too much, undue, unreasonable, exactedness, faultiness, flawless, ideal, demanding, error-free, impeccable. And then you go into a territory where more and more these things are not attainable and they are not sustainable. Once in a while, you may get close to one of these criteria, but on a daily basis, 7 days in a row, it's almost impossible to be impeccable 24/7 in everything that you're doing. So if that's your goal, you're more likely someone who is going to be a perfection striver than an excellence striver. So that's one way of making the distinction between the two. So excellence strivers represents people who are aiming and striving toward demanding, high, but realistic and attainable standard in a relatively flexible manner. And as soon as you cross the line, which is, I would say it's a proverbial line because we don't know with extreme precision and laser-like precision where to draw the line between the two. But the more you move into the more extreme, then you tend to become someone who goes into a zone of perfection striving more than excellence striving.
There was this, again, we spoke about it just before we hit record, that Dr. Gordon Flett had presented in the conversation we'd had, the idea of being a adaptable perfectionist and rigid perfectionist. And from what I've read through Excellenceism, I would have thrown adaptable in one of those excellent synonyms, because you think about, again, I just put this in the context of say a golfer, right? A golfer is a really good analogy. You could play the Masters or you could play the British Open. On 4 days, there could be 4 different sets of conditions. The first day could be no wind, sunny, just creme de la creme day for golf. Yeah. And you go and shoot 10 under. And Scotty Scheffler has gone out and shot 10 under, right? You turn up the next day, cloudy, gale force winds. You probably can't get to 10 under. So it's the idea of being adaptable in the pursuit of excellence, pursuit of those goals, of whatever excellence is on the day. And for me, just as soon as I was reading, I just thought, this is nailing on the head what I wish I had when I was a pro, because I was going out for so much perfection that it will never be enough. I'll never, even if whatever I achieve, it'll just never be enough. But actually recognizing, like, what does today need from me? What is my version of excellence? And kind of from a bigger perspective, what does my version of success look like today?
Yeah, I think adaptability is an outcome, I would say a cognitive behavioral outcome of excellencism, where because of their way of envisioning their goals and defining success, excellence strivers are going to be exactly as you described them. They're going to take what the day has to offer. Regardless of what it is, they're going to try to make the best, the most out of it. So if you play on, as you said, on a Thursday British Open opening round in pristine condition, you're going to try to shoot as low as you can. And then next day, if you go there and the conditions are just miserable, you know that probably an even par is going to be the best round of the day. Something around par is going to be great. So you just battle for that and you change your expectation based on it. One thing that I really like about excellencism is that it seems that there is less variability on a daily and a weekly basis of their performance. They're more constant. Again, they're going to be adaptable, but they're able to... I'm going to give you an example of a Tiger Woods when I'm not saying he was an excellent striver. I think that Tiger is more of a perfectionist, but when he was at his prime, he was able to transform a 2 or 3 over par into a -2 round because he was just battling, he was accepting mistakes, he was bouncing back. So after making a bogey, he was more likely to make a birdie on the next hole. And he was not accumulating mistakes after mistake after mistakes. So one of the strengths of the excellence strivers is that they're able to really compartmentalize their behaviors and their achievement. So they're going to play one shot at a time. They're going to throw one pitch at a time. And they're just going to focus on the moment instead of dwelling and beating themselves up based on what they've just did. And they will not look too far ahead because they know that things are likely to change. And the only thing you can really control, like we all always say, is the next 2 seconds that are laying in front of you. The rest is just too far to be worried of. That doesn't mean that they don't plan. They do plan, but I think that they are able to adjust their plan based on the condition and what life and the game is giving them in terms of opportunities.
I read it and I definitely thought that perfectionism or excellencism against perfectionism is taking the good things and trying to leave behind the concerns, the maladaptive behaviors. So my question would be, how do we take someone from a perfectionistic mindset to an excellencist mindset without them feeling like they're leaving something behind?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And just before answering this one, and if I forget, just repeat the question. You're right about the fact that excellence strivers is about taking in the positives. We, again, with Ben at the University of Manitoba, Ben does a lot of study on savoring. And it's important when you succeed because success is never guaranteed, you know. It's something that may happen today and then you get injured or what's going to happen. It might end just like that. So it's important to savor your success, to take in the positive, and to celebrate your achievement with people around you who cares about yourself and your career. And perfection strivers tends not to savor. They feel like savoring is a sign of weakness, of complacency. And it's not just savoring after winning a big tournament. It's just ongoingly savoring during a round, just tapping yourself on the shoulder and saying positive things to you instead of, again, always beating yourself up. So perfection strivers are not savoring their achievement. And this has a lot of, because it's never good enough. So what they're going to do, they're going to raise the bar in hope that if they do better next time, they're going to feel good about themselves. But then they realize next time that they're doing better, but it's still not enough. So they raise the bar. And eventually it's kind of a eternal, infernal loop where you will never be satisfied because the criteria and your way of defining yourself is biased. It's unrealistic and it's based on things that are just not sustainable and realistic. So how do we go from being a perfectionist to being an excellent striver? If I go clinically first, like there's a very interesting study that was done by Grieve and his colleague from Australia. They're the creators of cognitive behavioral training for perfectionists. So they identified perfectionists and they deliver psychoeducational training online or in person through workshops to try to transform perfectionism into non-perfectionism, which is where the MEP comes in, the model of perfectionism and excellencism comes in to say, well, we need to be cautious here not to transform perfection strivers into slackers. That's not what we want. You know, you want to have people who aim for high, demanding, ambitious goals, but without versing into the negativity associated with perfectionism. So in their program, they talk about the difference between excellence and perfection, about realistic and unrealistic standards. And they try to have perfectionists perfectionists realize that one of their biggest challenge is to stop defining themselves based on their success. They are people. They are individuals before being performers. So creating new priorities, stopping sacrificing your social life, your leisure, your hobbies for the pursuit of your work or professional goals, striking balance between everything is the type of things that they're working on in their cognitive behavioral treatment to try to have people moving away from perfectionism to become excellence strivers. So we recently reanalyzed some of their data and we published an article on it. And what we found is that based on their treatment, both perfectionism and excellencism tends to be reduced, but the reduction in perfectionism is much higher than the reduction in excellencism. So we don't transform perfectionist in non-perfectionist. We transform perfectionist into something that is alike what we define as an excellence strivers in the model of excellencism and perfectionism.
How long did that therapy, as an average, how long would that therapy go for, and maybe the intervention?
It's typically 6 to 8 modules of about 30 to 45 minutes each that people do self-paced on their own, or it can be guided by someone who's there to facilitate, but it's not something very long. And in most of the study, unfortunately, people don't go through the entire program. So they're going to do a few modules. They won't do the 6 or the 8 modules. And even if they don't complete everything, the effects of the program on reduction of perfectionism is still there. What I would like to see, and that's something that we're working on right now in my lab, is there's a huge movement in psychology now that's called the WISE psychological intervention, where the goal is to create interventions that are seamless, that are not invasive, that people are informed and without necessarily being aware that they are part of an intervention. So, for example, as they complete a questionnaire, people are going to be asked to complete little exercises to reflect on their tendencies and to give them also options to modify these tendencies. And the thing I like about it is that from a universal prevention standpoint, you don't have to wait for people coming knocking at your door to tell you I'm a perfectionist and I need help. You can reach out to a very large sample of, let's say, 3,000 participants, and they're going to be informed about the differences between excellencism and perfectionism, and they're going to be giving tricks to try to incorporate some of the facets of excellencism into their lifestyle and their behaviors. And then you follow them up and you try to see if it created positive change in their lives. And I feel like, I like clinical psychology because I'm a psychologist by training. But with mental health crisis right now and the needs and the limited availability of resources and service providers, we need to have other types of intervention that can be launched to reach as many people as we can before they actually develop problems associated with perfectionism.
How do you mitigate the risk of bringing in these excellent strivers? So from what you said there, the kind of cognitive behavioral training for perfectionism reduces both perfectionism and excellencism. And then from what you're talking about, this method is trying to bring more excellent strivers in.
Yes.
Have I got that? So then how do you mitigate between essentially creating a relapse?
That's a very good question. I think that
person starts to see excellencism and perfectionism going, I'm just going back, and they relapse back to being a perfectionist.
That's an excellent question. Even honestly, even with the cognitive behavioral therapy, we don't know because there hasn't been a lot of long-term studies. We typically evaluate the effectiveness over 6 months to 12 months. And then after that, the studies are done and we don't follow up people over the long term. So we don't have clear indication about relapse rates. But I'm sure that it's higher than what we would expect, because one way I like to talk about perfectionism, it's a little bit like alcoholism or dependencies to substance. It's going to be a lifelong struggle if you get rid of it, not to fall back into your old habit of being a perfectionist. So you need to be on the lookout. And in the cognitive behavioral therapy, one of their last module has to do with relapse and creating strategies to maintain the new tricks that have been acquired through the therapy. But how effective is it over a very long period of time? That I'm not aware of it.
So, this feels like a therapy session that I'm diving into.
I feel like, sometimes if we compare it to alcohol or substance, perfectionism is not a substance that in and out of itself is addictive. Outcomes of perfectionism can be addictive if you feel that it's needed to perform. But I feel like if you create a good relapse plan, as soon as you realize that you're versing into perfectionism again, most likely it's because you're going to feel the distress and the accumulated stress and the worries and the pain because of your striving toward perfectionism. So you're just going to say, okay, stop. Now I realize that I'm getting back into this pattern. So I'm going to go back to my notes, go back into my plans to try to come back in a place where I was as productive without being worried and without being unhappy. Because that's the thing. One of the basic principle or process that's involved in the model of excellencism and perfectionism is based on the analogy of the diminishing rate of return in economy. So the problem with perfectionism is that up to a point, they're going to put in effort, time, resources, and for each increment of effort, there is going to be an equal amount of return. So you work 0 hour on an assignment for an exam, you're going to get very bad grade. And then if you study an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour, eventually you're going to get returns out of the time you're investing into your studying. But up to a point, that return is going to become smaller and smaller and smaller. Most people know they will stop studying. They're going to say to themselves, I'm ready. I'm going to go do the exam tomorrow. Everything's going to be fine. Perfectionists are going to keep studying, mostly to reassure themselves, mostly to manage their anxiety and to try to convince themselves that they are perfectly prepared for the exam. They have left nothing on the table, so now they are certain of being able to perform. During exam, there are often the students who are going to stay longer in the classroom to double check and triple check and quadruple check their answers. Again, just to reassure themselves. And the problem with that is that as you get tired, the traces of the information in your long-term memory is going to become more and more and more thin, and you're going to start changing good answers with bad answers. So in my exam, when I'm proctoring the exam in my class, I walk around at the end of the exam, and when I see people turning their pen and I just go and are you sure you want to change that? And then they know that I'm giving them a hint about the fact that they may are changing a good one into a bad one. So we created these little analogy in one of our paper that we published where we say the perfectionist cook is going to whip his cream too much and might to try to create the perfect cream, the perfect crème fouettée, whipped cream. They're going to turn it into butter because that's what's happening as you keep whipping. A barber who is obsessed with the perfect trim, eventually you're going to get out of there. You won't have any much hair. Like
you'll end up look like me.
So you have a beard, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So as you keep investing too much resource into something, we would like to think it's going to be profitable, but sometimes it ends up being more costly and it doesn't give you any additional return over and above the pursuit of excellence. So excellencists know when to stop. They know when it's good enough, and they're going to take that in and move to be able to do something else in their life. So what we see on campus, which is fascinating, oftentimes the perfectionists have a lower grade point average than the excellence strivers because they get A+, 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 B, and C+. And the only reason why they're getting their B and their C+ is that by the end of the exam session, exam week, they're just exhausted and they don't have enough time to study everything. A, 5A gives you a better grade point average than 3A+ combined with a C and a B+. So again, just constant performance over the long term can be more profitable than big variability in your outcomes.
You can transfer that into sport. Yeah. I think I was definitely one of the athletes who you put a 7-day training schedule together. You train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as hard as you can, and then you come to Friday where you still have an important training day, or maybe Saturday you have a training day, but you've gone so hard, you've physically burnt yourself out, fried, mentally fried, that those last 2 days are you're kind of waiting for the weekend. You're just waiting for your rest. You're literally crawling to your rest day, and that's not good training. When I flipped it and I went quality and was willing to go in there and not do everything and just do something, it changed the way my training was, my outcomes, both on the field, but physically, just every outcome that you could probably get a metric on, everything just was an improvement. You said that excellencists know when to stop. Interestingly, I'd probably add that they probably know when to start as well, because perfectionists procrastinate. And you would definitely go, okay, no more. Do I need to be totally organized, have all my ducks in a row? I'm just going to go and give this a crack.
Totally agree. And there's also this, I don't have any data for what I'm going to say, but I also think there's another phenomenon called procrastination, which is the urge of starting too early. And imagine you are giving, you're in a 13-week class of biology, and you know you're going to have to do a final assignments to return in December. And probably as you go through the readings, the classes, the labs, the answers for the assignments are going to click in and you will be informed about exactly how to perform the task. So if you start too early, when you are not prepared and when you did not get all of the information to produce the assignments, that's probably a waste of time and resources. So sometimes it's good just to wait up to the optimal point where you know you have everything needed to be able to do the task, instead of jumping in too fast and investing resources that at the end of the semester might be needed. So don't exhaust your energy too fast on something that you're not prepared to accomplish yet.
Yeah, my therapist and I have had a conversation around when does procrastination turn into complacency. When there's that fine line of going, okay, I need enough time. And I think Adam Grant recently came out and had maybe done some research on that procrastination must happen for creativity. So you need enough to dwell over the answers and to understand. And the idea that if you're really struggling with something, go for a walk, get out, detach from it, and then give yourself that time to procrastinate the space, but then come in and take the action. And then the perfectionist will probably still go on 5 more walks to get away from the answer and actually starting.
And time is such a fascinating topic when you think about it, because it's time management and availability of time and making the most out of it is something that is understood and underestimated. Like when you ask, there has been studies in labs where students are invited to come study, but they are being observed. And they know they are being observed, which is the magic of these studies. And at the end of a 60-minute period, they all feel like they have been studying for 55 minutes. But when you look at their behaviors and the distraction and the stop and go, and what you realize is that most of them are studying 35 minutes out of a 60-minute period. So we all have these difficulties of self-monitoring and being aware of how much time we are really, really working when we are doing something. Same thing when you're doing a training session, we all feel like we spend 60 minutes out of 60 minutes doing something, but the time spent on physical movement is quite limited most of the time. And so the more you become efficient, like in the gym, for example, if you're doing physical training, if you can go through your training session in 35 minutes instead of an hour and a half, it means you're going to have time at the end of the day to take a walk, go outside, play with your children, maybe play a 9-hole of golf at the end of the day if that's one of your hobby. So just learning to become a little bit more efficient in how we handle the resources is one way of ensuring that by the end of the week, you checked all the boxes that needed to be checked without over-investing and overdoing. One thing, a final thing about this, because it's an example I often give. I was coaching ice hockey a few years back, and at the varsity level, I'm not a hockey player and I'm not even a hockey coach, but I helped one of my friends who needed support with this team. And one of the biggest things is sometimes you have athletes who they're the first on the ice and they're the last leaving the ice. So they're 15 minutes before the practice on the ice and 15 minutes after the practice still on the ice. And some coaches reward that. And they take these athletes as example. And I said to the coach, I'm worried about that because perfectionists tend to do that to impress the coaching staff. But you have a training plan. And recovery is part of that training plan. So if you accumulate 30 minutes extra on each single practice over a season, I'm afraid that you might miss some of the energy needed during the playoff to be at your best. So recovery is part of the training. And I feel that excellence strivers get this concept quite easily, but perfectionists are afraid that if they're missing out of opportunity to develop and to improve, they might fall short of their expectations.
I had really considered this, that there's this kind of duality that's going on and paradox that I think perfectionists really have, is they think that in their striving for high achievements, success, whether it's egotistically driven or not, you could dive into the self and what it means for the self, but we don't want to do that. They're striving for something, right? But the paradox becomes that within the mechanism of doing that, I believe it creates huge fragility, massively fragile. And the fact that, I've spoken about this before, someone who develops a meditation practice, right? Someone who wants to wake up every morning, 5:30 a.m. for a 6:30 half-hour meditation session, and they want to do that 7 days a week. They set this standard for themselves. But then Saturday rolls around and your mum calls you and says, I need you to take me to the airport. What time's the flight, mum? It's 6 a.m. You're not going to turn your mum down and leave her at home stranded with her holiday bags and not take her to the airport. You are going to have to adapt. But the perfectionist would find that a very daunting thing. It would really rip them apart. And I put this into my own life, is that I used to set a standard where if I had a training session and I'm still not fully recovered, I'd probably relapse with this, is that if I have a training session in my schedule, I'll almost not go to bed until I've done it. And that could be any time, Patrick. Like, I promise you, it could be 1 a.m. I'll still find a way to get the gym, go for a run, whatever it is. I will try to get it gone. It's my one thing that I kind of can't let go of yet as a recovering perfectionist. But I think I have definitely learned in other areas that if I am not flexible, if I'm not adaptable, like we said, excellencists create that adaptability. If you don't create that adaptability, then you just leave yourself so fragile for moments when it requires you to just move away from your structures. And if we think about it in a sporting context, sport literally requires you to perform in many different environments. There's only a few sports where the environment is so fixed, which makes gymnastics interesting. But the environment is always different in most sports. Whether you're playing a closed skill or an open skill sport, you have to adapt, and you're gonna create some fragility in yourself if you strive for only perfection.
I agree, and I think that life is going to find a way to get you out of your comfort zone all the time. Like, I think we all went through a pandemic a few years back that just rattled the heck out of everyone, but particularly perfectionists, because their plan was changed momentarily because of what was happening in the world. And this adaptability, flexibility, which I think is the hallmark of excellence strivers compared to perfectionist strivers, I think it's important. And sometimes I like to say to some of the more passionate but obsessive passionate athletes and coaches and workers, what you actually call a distraction, other people around you call it life. So by trying to manage and avoid and get rid of all of these distractions, you are creating yourself a perfect world where you become more and more and more isolated. So, if work, life, family is not an issue if you don't have any friends. It's not an issue if you don't have a partner. It's not an issue if you don't have a children or friends. And it can give you the impression that everything is under control in the short term. But in the long term, eventually your need for relatedness, if you put that on hold for too long, it's going to come back haunting you in one way or another. So finding a balance between competence and relatedness and our need to belong and to be surrounded by people that we love, that we care about, and that they care about us is just equally important as any achievement, competence-related strivings that we are trying to attain. But oftentimes in our society, it's easier to put anything that's social on hold than just to focus on, and we say, I'm going to take care of that later. And we did a study last fall where sometimes I like to ask the hardest question to the participants. The one you say to yourself, no one's going to say yes to that. It's just like ridiculous to ask this question. Questions such as, are you willing to sacrifice your health, for the pursuit of your goal? Are you willing to be alone for the pursuit of your goal? Like, I don't care if people look at me negatively as long as I'm doing good in whatever I'm doing. And perfection strivers were more likely to endorse these statements than the excellence strivers. So they are one of the mechanisms that sustain their perfectionism is their tendency to sacrifice things that are to them distraction, that for many of us we just call that life.
Is there enough data out yet to say whether excellencists still achieve the external outcomes that perfectionists have kind of notoriously achieved over periods of time? So you used Tiger Woods earlier, where you said, Tiger Woods, I would class him as perfectionist. Are we yet to see, or is that where we need to go in the next direction to really start seeing if we can get the same outcomes?
That's a great question. So far, apart from a few examples that I'm going to give you, we have yet to find cases where perfection strivers outperform excellence strivers on average. So you could get example like Tiger Woods, who is a notorious perfectionist that, of course, had a very, very high, impressive career. But on average, you take university students, the grades of the excellence strivers are higher than the grades of the perfection strivers. In sports, when you look at goal attainment, sometimes we find that the perfection strivers report higher level of goal attainment than the excellence strivers. But here's the catch. What comes with it is increased burnout, lower enjoyment, higher intention to drop out from their sport. And eventually, if we add up these components and we make a kind of a comprehensive or holistic evaluation, we say to ourselves, is it sustainable? If you're always worried, always concerned, you have more anxiety, more symptoms of depression, but yet you're performing better than the excellence strivers, is it sustainable? And that's my interpretation of Tiger Woods. I love Tiger Woods. As a golfer myself, I was always very impressed by his performance on the golf course, but not very impressed with his training regimen. Spending too much time on the driving range, hitting too many balls, running too many kilometers, has led him to many injuries that could have been avoided if he would have been satisfied with his golf swing and with his level of achievement. When you're winning 8, 9, 10 tournaments in a year, I don't see the point of doing a major overhaul of your golf swing because you don't like the way it sounds, the way it looks, the way it feels. So this perpetuous desire to become even better and to reinvent his golf swing has led him to overtraining and injuries that unfortunately may have cost him the possibility of beating Jack Nicklaus records of the numbers of major that he won.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I think, there's so much you can be said about where would Tiger Woods be right now if he was fit, healthy, with the amount of experience he's got, with the reputation he's got, walking out onto a golf course with by far a better increased level of field that he's probably faced in his entire career, but with that probably psychological advantage over other people that a hurdle they have to overcome. Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, don't want to live in a parallel universe.
That would be crazy. Even like his performance at this year's Masters, making the cut, with his amount of physical difficulties, because he's barely walking, let's be honest, like walking 36 holes 2 days at Augusta National, which is a very hilly golf course, for him is the maximum amount of effort he can put in physically. And to be able to go there and make the cut is nothing but impressive. You would give him a golf cart that he would be able to ride, and I'm sure he would still win golf tournament, because golf-wise, he's just spot on. But golf being a sport and guys needing to walk, this is where it's hurting him now, because with the amount of injury that he got, particularly the last car accident he got into, just is too much, too demanding of him, of walking 10 kilometers a day under the gun of competitive pressure. It's I wouldn't say impossible, because he might find a way of surprising us and winning the next year's Masters. Who knows?
He was out on the course.
People who might be capable of doing such a thing.
He was out. I think I read an article today that he was out on the PGA Championship course, and I don't know when this podcast will go out, but we could be talking with him in the having made the cut, and who knows.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to some of the strategies that we were talking about, moving someone from perfectionist to excellencist. Yeah. And I wanted to float a couple of things that I've done, that I've done for myself, like I said, as a recovering perfectionist, and things I found, because I do find myself both in, whether it's doing the podcast, whether it's YouTube, anything that's forward facing, I find myself procrastinating over the idea of I only am willing to do it until it's perfect. And so things that have worked for me are basically creating notes, like almost hand holding myself through that situation. And like you said, like alcoholism, you will forever be fighting it. And I think I've come to the recognition that I will be forever fighting it. So I need to have mechanisms in place. So for me, it's funny, I spoke to you before the recording about Professor Tim Woodman being one of my supervisors in my research, and he sort of catalyzed my interest in this area, because we did one of my assignments, which he sent a gauntlet task to describe a moment of perfectionism in your life, and then talk about perfectionism wrapped around your own being. And I straight away picked out this moment in my life when I had this perfectionistic tendency to not want to play a game unless I was fully fit and ready. And I remember as I went into this Viva exam, and I had all my notes that I was ready, I had all my studies that I was going to cite, and everything was good. But I wrote a mantra literally to the side of everything in big bold writing, just saying permission to be imperfect, because I had recognized that my perfectionism was wanting to be at his level, and I wanted to talk to him at his level, and I was not willing to even do it if I wasn't at his level. And I'm talking about a guy who's 20 plus years in the field of research. What ridiculous idea. This is like a first day rookie quarterback trying to throw better than Tom Brady in an NFL match, right? It's just ridiculous to think about it. And I had to write that mantra down in order to give myself permission to go, do you know what, you can fuck this up, like it's fine.
Yeah.
This is absolutely okay to do that. And so that's one strategy I've used, which is quite literally planting reminders and using quotes. And I used this based off some things that I had done when I was a youngster. I really lent on some reflections that I had when I was young, trying to find my way in the sport, trying to break through some barriers given my background. And I used to put quotes up on the wall, and that was really great. It was just sort of this subliminal messaging that I was having all the time of quotes, and I just fed off them. And then I felt like I just manifested that positive thinking and positive attitude through that. And then the other one I've done, and this is something that I've had with clients of mine, is building your level of, say, excellence based on character, and judging your success based on character, not outcome. So today I've actually had one of my clients who's an umpire, right? And they've gone out and performed. And I said, I don't care if you make a mistake, but I want you to come back to me and say why today was a good performance, whether you made loads of mistakes or not, but based on your character, because your character can adapt to the mistakes. Your character can deal with mistakes. Your character can come back from mistakes, be resilient in mistakes. And so what I've done is I've started to use a model of trying to get people to describe this character that they want to become, and then working backwards the steps that they would take to get there. And again, I've used this from both sort of, I guess, a knowledgeable insight, but also something that I did myself. When I was 14, 15, 16, I created the idea of what does a professional athlete version of Lewis look like, and go, okay, every decision I was met with was based on, does that character do this? It's kind of like how you would live your values, right?
Yeah.
You live your values and you live it based on this decision, this crossroad I'm at. Does it live with my values? Does it align with my values, or does it not? And so I just pose that same question. Is this aligned with the character you want to be or not? And so I think that's been really helpful for me in trying to move myself from this idea of being perfect and now to just be excellent. And that can be messy, that can be ugly, but it's going to work.
I like both strategies. The mantra reminds me of something I'm telling my athletes almost every single day. You know, you have the failure is not an option. I tell them failure is always an option. You're allowed to fail. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to try things that may not work out. It's part of the learning process to make mistakes. And this whole ideas of failure is always an option. I also say to the parents on my team, it also applies to the coaching staff. And it also applies to you as parents. There is no cookbook to be a good parent, and there is no cookbook to be a good coach. So as much as I'm willing to give permission to your kids to try and fail, as much I want you to understand that as a coach, I also have the permission to try things that will not work out the best all the time. And your strategy of focusing on character, I think, is a great way to just change the focus and see the character as the process that leads to the outcome. That if you put all of the elements in the right place at the right time, eventually success will happen. It's more likely to happen. Then you know what it is in sport. There's only so many spots available on a team. There's only 3 places on the podium at the next Olympic game. And guess what? Your opponents are there for the same reason as you are. So they want to win just as much as you do. So focus on development, focus on character, focus on things that after your sport career is over, you're still going to be able to rely on. And I know it's cliche, we say that all the time, but 20, 30, 40 years from now, when your career is going to be over, the only thing that's going to left is the things that you learned out of it. And it's true in sport, it's true in any type of work where eventually we're going to have to retire and move on and do something else. And you want to prepare the next step for whatever the next step could be in your life.
I'd had a conversation with Gordon Flett also about the idea of mattering. And I know he was doing some work in mattering. And this is where this also leads into, was the fact that if you create this character of yourself that you end up being proud of, regardless of the outcome, then again, reflectively, you can look back on it and go, well, at least I'm doing it in the way that I'm proud of myself for being. I'm just happy with the human being that I am. And it's an exercise that I get people to do, is this exercise called human being, human doing. Because if we think about it, the idea is that most perfectionists, a lot of us in life, will think that in order to be someone, I need to do something. And we forget very much how we need to be in order to get something done. And like we said, I'm a big believer in it. If you get that, how I need to be right, chances are the outcome will happen, the doing will happen. But we focus so much on the doing that even if we go and accomplish our goals, that doesn't discount that you, on that route to it, could have been an asshole. You could have cheated. You could have deceived people. You could have lost your friends. And there's so many biographies, autobiographies of people who have been ultimately successful. I've come across these athletes before where they, in striving for the attainment of those goals, they have just plowed through their personal life and just the destruction that's been left behind them. And those are the ones that, when it's all said and done, have to pick up the pieces. And so it's not just in the future self trying to forecast all of the dangers that lie, but actually in the here and now, you can just be proud of yourself for going about it based on your character, your values, who you are. And I think that's a message we should be sending a little bit more, especially to younger people, and I think especially from coaches. And this leads me into what I wanted to talk about next, which was, how do we start to set goals based on excellence rather than perfection?
I think even before setting goals, which is important, but being aware of your language and being aware of the values in the culture of your organization. As a coach, you're the person driving the boat. So you are in a privileged situation to create the values and a culture that you feel is going to be good for both the well-being and the productivity of your team. But oftentimes our language gets in the way. We are not even aware of it, but shoulds are a big part of perfectionism. So perfectionism is a tyranny of shoulds, out, must. So people put pressure on themselves to do things, and they feel like they're never doing it enough. So they're going to put even more pressure on themselves to do it. So when we're talking to our athletes in practice, well, we should do this, you need to do that, you ought to do avoid these language. Try to be a little bit more autonomy supportive and suggest. Have you considered maybe trying this? Have you maybe thought about doing that? May I propose that we try to do this and that and that? So it may seem a little bit boring and less directive, because coaches, we like to be bosses, like, let's be honest. But it just puts the athletes in a different mindset. Instead of doing it to please you, they're going to do it in a more open, exploratory manner. And, there is also this tendency of, you cannot say that failure is always an option. If you start yelling, criticizing, be mad, verbally and non-verbally, every single time someone does an error in a competition or in a match. So you need to live up to your values and to your culture. If errors are part of the learning process, they will happen. And when they will happen, they will need to be treated as a natural part of the learning process. So I feel that creating a motivational climate that is mastery-based, focused on learning, focused on improvement, focused on the welfare of the team is more important than focused on the results and the outcome of the game. But you need to live up to these values. Even if it's the most important game of the season, if someone makes a mistake, you need to act in a way that will allow the team to bounce back from this mistake. You need to trust that people can bounce back from mistake because they have been trained and encouraged and rewarded for this effort to tolerate, accept, learn, improve based on their mistakes. It's not easy to do because, to be honest with you, coaches also have a ton of pressure on their shoulder to perform, coming from above and coming from below, parents, athletes themselves. And we are easily replaceable people. So when you win, it's easy to be cool, it's easy to be relaxed, it's easy to be autonomous, supportive. But when you're on a losing streak and you feel that the heat and the pressure is on you to get out of this losing streak, it's where it's even more important to be autonomy supportive and to live up to the value and the culture that you're trying to define for your organization. But it's not, it's easier said than done. Again, a lot of coaches are perfectionists, so they also need to have relapse plan that when they go back into the zone of perfectionism, they need to swing back into a zone of excellence. Otherwise, athletes are going to get the incoherence and they might eventually themselves move into a zone of perfectionism instead of excellence striving.
Yeah, that goal setting and perfectionism balance for me is just about bringing in a level of reality.
Yes.
And if we were to shift this into the practice environment, which I know you wrote about, saying that we have to have this reality to recognize that if we are to be perfectionistic in practice, then we're not willing to make mistakes. It's a very uncomfortable place to be, but that limits the learning. And if we're to just basically go, okay, well, what's the reality of this practice session today? Is it to perform? Probably not, because it's practice. Or is it to learn? Okay, well, if we take it as learning and we want to grow, we're going to have to take the rough with the smooth, and that is that we're going to have some failure within it. And that has to be, for me, where you set out a very clear expectation of your training early on, that you say, okay, today is a session where it's going to be ugly, it's going to be messy. I've begun doing this with some of my athletes where I say to them, today's session is purely about either feeling the fear of failure and knowing how you deal with it, like purely understanding where does your mind go when you're in that session, because you need to know it first off now, so that when it happens in a game, it's not a shock. It's something that you've lived through before. Or are we trying to develop a skill? Okay, if we're trying to develop a skill, then let's be aware that we're probably going to have to deconstruct something. We probably have to go backwards a little bit in order to project ourselves forward, because once you start repeating it, that learning process can be quite quick. Like, you will surprise yourself how quick you do it. But if you're only rigid in your practice and you're trying to hit the perfect shot, you're trying to execute the perfect goal, however it looks, you're stuck. You're completely stuck and you're not going anywhere. So yeah, how do we bring excellencism into our practice environments?
I like that a lot. Like, one of my graduate students does research on exactly what you described, a focus on learning or a focus on performing. And oftentimes athletes enter a practice with a focus on learning something. So trying a new trick, trying a new movement, pattern, anything. But as you fail, a lot of athletes go back into their default mode. So instead of trying the 3-pointer in basketball, they're going to move in, they're going to drive the net, and they're going to go with their layup. And then you say, hey, we were supposed to practice 3-pointers. Yeah, no, but no. So reverting back to things that you're comfortable instead of practicing on things that you were supposed to practice during a practice is, again, the hallmark of a perfectionist. Yeah, coach, but it doesn't work. Yeah, but I cannot do this. Yes, but I feel miserable. Everyone's looking at me and I'm not making the 3-pointers. Yes, but that's what we're practicing today. So going back into things that are easy for you, that you're comfortable with, that you know is going to be guaranteed success, instead of practicing things that you need to improve, things that you need to develop to be ready and more versatile when you come to playing a game, is more the mindset of an excellence striver. So I think I like what you said, just sitting down at the start of a practice and laying down the expectation. Oftentimes we don't spend enough time clarifying what's the goal of the activity that we're doing. So we may have something in our mind, but we don't communicate that to our athletes. So they try to impress us. They try to perform as perfectly as they can. They don't allow themselves to explore, to be creative, to discover new things, because we are not explicitly telling them that's the goal today. Just go out and try different things. And of course, kids don't necessarily have all of the knowledge to be able to know what to explore. So we need to reduce the amount of option that we are giving them to create a little bit constraint-based learning where you know that you tweak different elements of your environment and they're going to be forced somehow to discover the optimal way of doing a task or the optimal decision making when it comes to a pattern of play or a strategy. So you design the environment and the task in a way that they will be forced, without being forced, of discovering the optimal pattern to succeed at a task. So a lot of the job is done before the practice when you design your learning environment to try to envision what they need to work on and how can you reduce the degree of freedom so that they're going to be able to maneuver around and eventually produce a movement or a strategy that you think could be effective for them. Less verbal cues, less verbal feedback, and more designing tasks where the feedback is the success of the task in and out of itself. Kids hate having feedback from adults. We all don't very much appreciate feedback in life. So if the task gives you the feedback, it's easier to accept the feedback that comes from the results than the verbal feedback that comes from someone else.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't think it's, even in sports I've played, where you see the coach going and giving that pep talk midway through the session. It never really goes down too well. It should essentially come after the session.
Yeah.
And I've set a new rule within my team. I've become captain of my team this year, and I've set new standards within training, and we've had some good training sessions already. And I actually got to have training later on, and I'll try to do the same thing. And it's very simplistic, which is, in our sport, if I could put this in baseball terms, if you were to be a batter and you were facing a pitching machine, whereas instead of practicing facing an actual pitcher, a human pitcher, in our instance, what I do is I say, when you're facing the machine, you are free to explore, to have creativity, to try something new. That's where you can mess up. That's where it can be. That's your zone of imperfection. But when you're facing a bowler, because you don't know where that ball is going to be pitched, because you don't know where it's going to be, and you have to practice a mindset of being in a game. Otherwise, it's really wasted training, because you're not going to get the ability to do that creativity because you don't really know where the ball's going to be. In cricket, I know you have a pitching box, a pitching square that you potentially have to pitch into. We don't have that. You can bowl at someone's body, their feet. You can do. It's free for all in cricket. It can be anywhere. That's why it's a very interesting sport. It's very technical and very demanding for a batter as well. So there's no idea of where you know exactly where it's going to be. So maybe this example of baseball to cricket is different. So there's a variety of different options. So as soon as I see that, I've seen it very often that players will go into a net session and they will face a bowler and they will try to be creative and do it. And I'm saying, well, what are you doing? You don't have the field, you don't have the environment. The only thing you're going to be able to get out of this is either surviving this like it's a game and going through it and doing well in it like it's a game, or you're just going to have a terrible practice. You're just going to, whatever you're trying to do. And there is an element that you can do some creativity, but I think I don't see it very sustainable over time, that people just can't see that distinction with. As soon as I'm up against a batsman, bowler v batsman, it becomes game-like scenario. And that's actually really valuable practice, because then you're practicing sort of the value of your wicket, not getting out, executing skills, reacting in the right way. And there's so many benefits that you can get, that when they go into a performance and they don't do them, they only upon reflection beat themselves up, because they're like, why did that not work? And it's like, well, you don't train like that. So why should you see success as an option, because you've not been training like that? Yeah. So I've set these really clear boundaries with them. And even to the point where I've said, I don't even care if you don't hit one ball as a batsman. If you leave every single ball, if the bowler is bowling well and you have to leave every single ball and you don't hit it, and you are in that net for 20 minutes, but your mindset has been in the right place, you've had the right energy, you've felt like you're watching the ball, you are executing your cues, your process is shit hot. That is a good training session. To walk away from that and go, I actually got something out of it. I didn't hit one ball, I didn't have outcome success, what people might think, but actually I can transfer that into the first 20 minutes of my game where it's going to be tricky. It's going to require me to have a mindset that's going to be gritty and a tough approach to the game. That is a very good training session. But on the sort of written on paper and what it looks like, people might argue, you didn't hit a single ball. Why did that not work? Go, that's not what we're practicing. We're not practicing that because we can't say whether the ball is in a place to be hit because it's batter v bowler. And that change of training has come off. It's had some good feedback. The guys are like, I'm feeling ready for the season. Whereas it's very easy to go through the motions and not have that plan, not have that structure, not have that clear, defined difference between this version of training and this version of training and what they both mean and what's the outcomes and the goals based on what we're setting.
Have you felt in your experience doing that perfectionists are a little bit more resistant to this approach?
Interesting, because I was a perfectionist and I was not. I think one of my issues thinking about it was probably the willingness to change the way you trained. So if there was a format, I had a real big format of training that I felt had got me to the level I was at. And I actually was not willing to sort of unpick that training and then recognize that from an amateur level, then crossing over to professional level, I needed to change and I needed to bring in some new ways of doing things. I probably took a little too long to do that, to increase my development earlier on. So I think there's sometimes a resistance in the way in which you train. I would say as long as they are getting the results or the feeling and the outcome, it's very hard to say because they're amateurs, and obviously that doesn't discount that they aren't perfectionists, but I think you do marry up your ability level, your ability to execute skills, and probably your level of perfectionism. So the more you can execute a certain variety of skills under certain conditions, I would probably say perfectionists, then that sort of increase in perfectionism is there because you're going, well, I can set higher standards for myself now. Whereas if sometimes, and I would even argue a cultural thing, sometimes in England we're quite self-deprecating, and we have tall poppy syndrome, and our humour based as English people, we take the piss out of ourselves quite a lot. So you'll find that people might cut themselves down quite a lot just to make themselves feel like a part of the community. So that could play a part. But I do think as soon as your skill level increases, then you're raising that inverted limbo bar. It's starting to shift, and I think that can play a part. So no, I haven't. I don't think anecdotally I haven't seen a resistance at an amateur level because there's not a net level of expertise that would suggest it. I think at a professional level, you might see some resistance, and I think even if I draw upon some memories, there are some moments where I think teammates of mine didn't adapt their training early enough because they were so stubborn in the way they'd done things, and they almost weren't listening to the feedback and even just the real-time feedback of results that they were getting, that it took them so long to actually change. So there could be something in that, but I couldn't be certain.
That's interesting because me in baseball, with the pitchers, which the equivalent of the bowlers in crickets, and the batters, there's this very traditional way of coaching where it's based on volume, it's based on repetition, and problem is that most of this volume and repetition is not game-like. So for example, the pitchers are going to practice only with a catcher but with no batters in the box. So as soon as you put in batters in the box, their velocity is going to go down, their precision's gonna go down, and you need to relearn as soon as you change one ingredient of the equation. So that's why you have a lot of good pitchers in practice and very few good pitchers in games, because in the games you need to vary. You will never throw the same pitch twice in a row. You're gonna go with a fastball, a curveball, another fastball, a changeup. and they don't practice necessarily this variability. And a lot of kids hate practicing variability because when they do, their success is not as good. So they make mistakes. They don't look as sharp, and they don't build up their confidence. At least that's what they're telling me. So they would rather practice like 8 fastball in a row, then 5 curveball, 5 changeup. But the reality of a game is that your first curveball needs to be on spot. If you're missing it, you won't get a second chance because the ball is going to be over the fence. So there's this a little bit of perfectionist seems to be unwilling to put themselves in condition where they will fail in training, even if they know it's needed to learn and to be able to transfer their skill from practice to game. But of course, I don't have any empirical evidence for that, but these are studies that I would be very interested to start doing in the next few years to see how our best practice in learning and motor learning sometimes are not implemented by coaches because coaches themselves don't like to see their athletes fail because it's looking back on them as if they were not coaching properly. And athletes being also too self-critical and unwilling to put themselves into the struggles of failing to learn.
I think you literally just described the first 4 years of my professional career. So I had that exact same thing. I was a good what's called a net bowler. So I bowled for a consistent few years, better in nets than I did in games. And we're talking about the feedback from players and staff saying that just when you play a game, Lewis, there's just not that whip on the ball. But when you're in training, like it's dangerous. Like it's high level. But then when we go into a game, you're just careful. And so I recognized that. And then I did something different, which was I recognized that I was going all out in training. And then what I started to do was so similar to baseball slightly, we have these markers that I would put down on the pitch, but the balls that we have to bowl as cricketers, we have multiple different lengths that we have to bowl on the pitch.
Okay.
And then you can bowl multiple different varieties of balls. So for example, I can bowl 3 types of slower ball. So I can bowl that, but I can bowl that slower ball at multiple different lengths. I have to bowl something called a Yorker, where you essentially try to hit the batsman on the toes, or you can move that Yorker to across the crease on the wide line, so where he can't hit it to it's wider than where he's standing. Or I could bowl a bouncer, and I could bowl it halfway down the pitch to try and hit him in the head. I could bowl it hip height to try and hit him in the hips. I can bowl all of those lengths at different lines. There's endless multitudes of what you can do. And what I found was when I'd go into training, I would try to do a lot of things and end up doing kind of nothing and not developing anything. So when I set out my training, that I was very strategized in, okay, I'm focused, this is my main outcome for today. I'm going to bowl my knuckleball into this length, and that's what I'm going to try and do. But I'm going to do it with markers, and then I'm going to assess my process in how I get to that outcome. So for every single ball that I bowl, I have a different technical feel. Now, essentially, all I do is kind of robotic, is that when I get to the top of my mark, I insert the input, which is the ball that I want to bowl, and then in my mind, I'm pulling off the technical cues that I need to do in order to achieve that. So I know if I'm bowling my knuckleball, for example, I need to feel as if I'm throwing it. Sounds weird, but it's like it's a technical thing that I have to feel as if I'm throwing it. And if I can do that, then I know I execute the knuckleball perfectly. If I'm bowling my offside cutter, so it's like rolling my fingers on it, I have to feel like I'm trying to spin the ball and I'm having to go over the ball and I'm having to drag it down. So I'm having to have that feel. So I have to be really tall. If I'm bowling my back of the hand slower ball, I have to feel like I'm collapsing onto the floor, and then I have the back of my palm is facing the batter. Now, all of these, if you were to look at me technically, if I was to show you footage of me bowling all 3 of those balls, you'd look at my technique and go, it doesn't look any different, right? If I'm to bowl my Yorker and try and hit them on the toes, I have to imagine I'm throwing a javelin at the batter because I have to get long in my action. So all these technical cues that I have to sort of input to get the outcome. And when I was training, I would do those and I would never be able to kind of slot them into a game. But what I would do is I would train and I would start off by learning the skill by seeing moving markers. So if I'm trying to bowl a Yorker at someone's toes, I'd get an old pair of my boots and put them down on the pitch, and I'd just go and bowl endlessly at these pair of boots and practice the feel, execution. And then as soon as I started getting a good percentage of execution, I would ask a teammate to come and bat. And I would literally just bowl Yorkers at them and just go, this is the scenario. Your challenge is to try and hit this ball as far as you can because it's good for them. And then my challenge is try and hit you this is the field we're going to have, like this is the scenario. And then it gave me confidence that I could execute it with the batter there. And then when it came to a game, I knew exactly, again, insert the input that I wanted. Here's the outcome that I needed. And then bang, I want to try and achieve that outcome. And the success improved because I was actually able to go and develop the skill, implement it into a scenario type situation against batter, and then try and do it in a game. Now, did it discount the fact that in a game there's added pressure, expectations, things like that? No, that's another mechanism you've got to deal with. But I also think that the reason it took me so long to get there was based on the fact that some of my coaches, when I was getting things wrong in training, I felt like I was being judged and I wouldn't get selected in games because my practice wasn't perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I think it's a point that when we were talking about specifically creating goals for practice, you need to be very clear that I'm allowing you to explore. And please note that anything that you do here will not be judged against you, will not be taken against you to make my lineups for the game in the weekend. Because as soon as they feel that there's competition to get on the field, then it cannot work. The idea of exploration, discovery, and not making mistake cannot work. They feel as if they are involved in the perpetual selection process. So they need to have a sense of security and safety to be able to just let themselves make errors. Otherwise, that's the challenge of always being fearful of losing your spot if you're exploring and you're making mistakes.
I'm very conscious of time, and we've been going. I want to unless there was something you wanted to touch on there.
Yeah, but maybe a final. There's one thing I think is worth mentioning is the role of self-compassion and self-forgiveness, and these which oftentimes in sport self-compassion is perceived as weakness. Like if you're too gentle on yourself, you will not learn, you will not improve, and it's kind of a waste of time. But there's nothing wrong in treating yourself like you would treat your best friend. Like the thing that you say up there, the worries, the concerns, the doubt, the rumination is unneeded, and it needs to stop. It cannot be maintained. You need to have a clear mind to be able to do your sport activities and to perform. So self-compassion is just a way of, instead of bashing yourself for having all of these negative thoughts, realize, be aware of it, and make them stop. And accept that mistake is part of the learning process, that struggle is common to everyone, whoever played your sport. And as soon as you start talking to other people around you, you will realize that we're all nervous. We all have the jitters once in a while. We all have the yips once in a while. We have good days, bad days, good innings, bad innings. It's part of being an athlete, and it's part of being a human being. So this, again, goes back to what we've said. You have the right not to be perfect all the time. Failure is always an option. The goal cannot be to win games. We all want to win games. People show up at the game for the same reason, to win the game. That cannot be the goal. You may play a perfect game and lose it, and you may play an imperfect game and win it. So sometimes you're going to shoot 64 in a golf tournament and it's not good enough to win the tournament. Sometimes you're going to play 74 and it's going to be good enough to win the tournament. So winning cannot be the outcome upon which you define yourself, your success and yourself as a person.
You wrote sport is a microcosm of life, and I think you've just defined it beautifully there.
And I think as soon as kids realize that, the better equipped they're going to be to face everything in life. You know, you might find this person attractive and you dream that this person would fall in love with you. It might not happen. You have limited control over that. So, of course, you're going to walk to this person and you're going to introduce yourself and you're going to wear nice and you're going to try to act as good as you can to maximize your likelihood of having a relationship with that person. This person has the right to say no to you. And you're just going to need to move on to another person and try it over again to see if you can develop a relationship with that person. Sport is like that. Everyone wants to be on the national team. There's only so many amount of place available. So our role as parents is not to kill the dream of our children by telling them, you know, there's only so many people who are doing it. Our role is to accompany them through the ups and downs and be realistic that it might happen, it might not happen, but as long as you're proud of your process, as long as you learn something valuable through it, eventually, if it's sport, life, work, something positive is going to come out of it, even if you don't win the medal at the next Olympic game. So defining it as character, as you said earlier, I think is important. What I like to say to some of my athletes is, you know what, buddy, 30 years from now, when I will come across you in a restaurant, I will not remember the ball that you hit over the fence or the strikeout that you got into the seventh inning. What I will remember out of you is that you were a great person, a good teammate, someone that was always there for others, willing to cheer and to support them. That's what's going to be remembered out of you. How you make people feel, not necessarily your performance on the field.
I couldn't agree anymore. Patrick, look, this has been an incredible 2 hours that we've been going for. This has been one of my favorite conversations. I feel like I could go on for another 2 hours. Where do you see, or where would you like to see excellencism going now?
Well, everywhere. Everywhere. I'm going to tell you why everywhere. In the perfectionism literature, we have been unfortunately measuring personal standards the wrong way. So it's been measured with questionnaires that are conflating perfectionism and excellencism. So the effect that we are estimating, the correlation that we're getting is biased. And biased toward and leaning towards discovering false positives for perfectionism. Positive correlation with well-being, positive correlation with performance, negative correlation with burnout. But as soon as we move away from these older questionnaires and we separate high standards versus perfectionistic standards, excellencism versus perfectionism, what we start seeing is what Gordon Flett, Paul Hewitt has been telling us for the last 30 years. Perfectionism, most of the time, relates to negative outcomes. So it's important to start measuring it in a way that makes this clear distinction, because the effects and the conclusion and the guidelines that we can generate out of it are more prudent. They are more realistic, and they tend to not show a lot of evidence to the idea that perfectionism can be adaptive. Most of the time when we see some positive outcomes, they need to be considered holistically with the list of negative outcomes that are also associated with perfectionism. So it's this balance and this looking at the forest instead of just looking at individual tree that I wish we would start doing a little bit more in this literature. So I think that's a big point of revisiting everything that we studied with the scope, which is the questionnaire that we developed to measure excellencism and perfectionism, to re-estimate more properly the effects of perfectionistic standards. That would be my dream outcome over the next 10 years to see that happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just for the fact that if I looked at your symbolic logic image that you created for excellencism and perfectionism of excellencism sitting within perfectionism, just from what I take from it and this conversation is that they both can go towards the same thing, but one is going to have massively negative outcomes compared to the other. And it's this litany of negative outcomes and the long and what we've spoken about today. So, I'm very excited I'm so glad to have had this conversation. I'm so glad to have come across your work and to be able to talk about it, really chew the cud on it for today. And just like I said, I can only sort of reiterate how exciting it is for this to come into the literature, but also how it can practically go into really rubber meeting the road for a lot of, whether it's players, coaches and domains. So look, Patrick, thank you so much for your time.
And if I may end on maybe just a final thing before I leave you, because I think it's important. Sport is, as you said, a microcosm of life, and being a social psychologist, I study other things than sport and education and work. And one thing that I think where we need to be heading with the perfectionism literature is also towards sustainability. I think that perfectionists are never satisfied of what they have, including what they consume, what they buy, their clothes, their car, their house. And if you are never satisfied, it also means that you're going to consume more than what you need to be happy and to be securing your basic needs as a human being. So we live in a world where we know that our planet is not doing that great, and we know that our resources are becoming more limited. With climate change, I think that perfectionism is a public health concern, because if we all consume more than what we should, we're going to run out of gas. So I think that understanding that what we have can be good enough, that our house is good enough, that our clothes are good enough, that the land we occupy is bigger than what we need to be happy and successful individual, is also part of moving toward excellencism as a way of ensuring that future generation gets enough resource to be able to live on a sustainable planet.
Yeah, totally agree. Patrick, where's the best place for me to guide people to follow your work and to see what you're up to?
I would say Twitter. So going on our, actually not Twitter, but X nowadays, following our line of research, we try to post quite frequently updates about what we're doing, what we're presenting in conferences. That's the best place to follow us.
Perfect. Patrick Gaudreau, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank
you
very much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you this morning.